Alrighty, so my name is Kyle, and this is my wife Molly.
Hi, everybody.
And we are pastors here in the Global Methodist Church. I serve a little town called Marion Center in western Pennsylvania. I'm halfway between IUP and Punxsutawney Phil. So if you know where those two things are, that's kind of where we're at.
The groundhog.
Yes.
Groundhog Day?
Yes.
Yeah!
Woohoo!
Phil!
Yes. Yeah. And then Molly, you want to introduce what you do?
Yeah, so again, my name's Pastor Molly, this dude's wife, and I serve as a pastor of college ministry at IUP. I don't know if any of you are looking at colleges, but I'm around there. It's in Indiana, Pennsylvania, not the state. Pennsylvania has lots of towns that are named after states, so it's kind of confusing. But that's where I'm at, and
we've been married since August of 2023. So we are going to be talking about how to form some healthy relationships.
Yes, and we did date at one point before
at
that.
one time.
Yeah,
Yes.
but we're going to talk about healthy relationships today. I know your little packet says Christian dating, which we will spend probably a bulk of our time talking about that. But we're also going to talk about some other relationships that we'll have with our families and friends. Because not everyone will date, not everyone will get married, and that's like totally cool, totally good. The Bible says that might even be a better option for folks. So we will touch on dating a good bit, but that's not where we're going to spend all of our time today. And then at the end, we're going to close with a time of questions where you can ask any question, no questions off limits about any kind of relationship. So if you're thinking of questions, save them till the end. What's up?
Can I have one of those pencils?
Yeah. We'll also pass these out towards the end for questions too, if you want to write down your question. But be thinking about it as we go through our time together.
Okay. And my man in the back, could you close that door too, now that we're kind of all settled? Okay, thank you. Okay, Molly, do you want to go
perfect.
start?
So, like I said, we're going to talk about all kinds of healthy relationships this morning. And what we're going to find is that there is a foundation that we have as Christians for all relationships as we engage with all kinds of people, whether that be our parents, siblings, friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, whatever. And that foundation is love. And so we've been in Romans 12 a lot this weekend. So Kyle, would you read some from Romans 12 that talks about love being the foundation?
So this is Romans 12, starting in verse 9. Don't just pretend to love others, really love them. Hate what is wrong, hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection, and take delight in honoring each other. Never be lazy, but work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. Rejoice in our confident hope. Be patient in trouble and keep on praying. When God's people are in need, be ready to help them. Always be eager to practice hospitality.
Thanks, Kyle. And so I know we as Christians, we talk about love a lot, right? It's because the Bible talks about love a lot. And so whenever we're talking about how we engage in relationships with one another, no matter who that person is, it's important that we realize that the foundation for that relationship is love. And the kind of love that the Bible talks about is way better than what you'll find in secular music or just perusing the world around you, right? This love that we have from God that we're able to share with others is selfless. It's about outdoing one another in honor, or this translation talks about taking delight in showing honor to others, which means we're raising others up and we're allowing ourselves to take a back seat. Right? And that's not always easy. In fact, it's often the harder thing, but it makes for much better relationships. And in the best relationships, both parties are doing this. Right? In the best friendships or in the best family relationships, in the best dating relationships, both people are thinking about, how do I show honor to the other person? How can I show love to the other person? And that's where the best relationships happen. Now, you and I know we live in this world where we don't perfectly love one another, right? Where other people might not show honor to us, or other people might not love us. And so we as Christians who are committed to following Jesus, we have to say, regardless of how this other person's going to treat me, I am committed to showing them love and honor. And we'll talk about this later, but that doesn't mean that we allow people to abuse us, right? Or continuing to be in a deep relationship with someone who's continuously hurting us. That sometimes means we take a step back to protect ourselves and respect ourselves, but it does mean that we are showing respect and honor even when it's not shown to us. And that is really hard. And most of the time people don't do that, and they just continue to mistreat each other, and that's how relationships get toxic and messed up. But our hope today is that we can help one another kind of stop that cycle, where even when we're being mistreated, we're going to treat others with love. And that will lead to healthier relationships. And the hope is that we can be in relationships where that is mutually shown. And so when we show love to others, the kind of love that we want to show is love that is kind, love that is patient, right? That we're not going to be quick to get angry at someone when they wrong us. Instead, we're going to be quick to forgive, maybe even forget if possible. I forget a lot of things, so that's kind of easy for me. Some of you probably have better memories than I do. When we love others, we're going to assume the best in them rather than assuming the worst. We're not going to be super critical, but instead we're going to be humble and assuming the best. Being generous, all these things are ways that we can show love to people regardless of what kind of relationship we are in with them. And also, I would just say constantly when you're in relationship with people, which you're going to be in all kinds of relationships throughout your life, if you're unsure of what this looks like, think, how would Jesus treat this person if Jesus were me? If Jesus was in my shoes, what would he do? I mean, the classic what would Jesus do thing kind of gets old, right? But you see it on bracelets. It is a good reminder that we are called to love people the way Christ loves us. And that's a pretty big ask, right? But it's the better way, for sure, and leads to healthier relationships.
And when we think about all these relationships, thinking, starting with this idea of how does God love us, and then trying to be like God to other people, right?
Right.
We're not always good to God, but he is always good to us. Just like sometimes, like Pastor Molly was saying, other people won't always be good to us, but we can choose to be good to them. I think sometimes people think, even whether it's dating, if I just find my right person, it'll be super easy. Or if I just had better parents, or if I just had better friends, if I just found the right people, that suddenly these things would work out better. And the truth is, it's actually never easy, okay? It actually takes work to be a good person and a good friend and a good boyfriend or girlfriend or a good child to someone else, okay? We actually have to do our part to honor who Jesus is to these other people, okay? And that's why you start with God as kind of the foundation of what love is. Right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I think the good news is that, we don't want to scare you and be like, oh my gosh, relationships are super hard, you better watch out. Because the good news is, as Christians, God the Holy Spirit is with us. Right? When we receive Jesus, God the Holy Spirit comes and lives in us and helps us to love others. And so we have a great friend, a great advocate in God who is going to help us to have healthy relationships with others. Because this is what God wants for us. God wants us to thrive in relationship. He doesn't want us to have a terrible time with it. Okay. So God is on our side. Foundation for all relationships is love. And so now we're going to talk about some specific types of relationships, keeping all that in mind.
Yeah, and the reason why, we know it says Christian dating, but you know what? Honestly, you're going to find that dating is really difficult if you haven't worked through your family relationships. And if you don't know how to be a good friend to someone in a platonic way, you're not going to really be able to be a good boyfriend or a girlfriend to someone else because you haven't worked through all your issues. And some of you are younger, and if you're 7th or 8th grade, you're I don't really have any issues. Congratulations, I'm very happy for you. But as you get older, sometimes life gets more complicated, and you discover sometimes things don't go the way you want them to go, and maybe things weren't as easy as you thought. And so as you get older and you realize these things, you want to make sure you work through them in a healthy way. And understanding what a healthy family is and what healthy friendships look like, that's really helpful before you start thinking about dating and thinking about romance. So thinking about family, probably one of the big things that comes to mind, especially when you're in middle school or high school, would be honoring your parents. That's one of the 10 commandments, honor your mother and father. Now, that doesn't mean just doing whatever they want, okay? That is good news, because often we don't want to do what our parents want us to do, right? Okay, but what it means is respecting them. So let me tell you a story. I have a lot of nativity scenes that I like to put out around Christmas time, okay? I always have these different ones, and I have this really nice one that's pretty and honestly costs a little bit of money. Well, my mom says to me last year, Kyle, I want to borrow your nativity scene so I can display it at my church. They were doing like some sort of nativity fair. And quite frankly, if anyone else asked me, I would have said, no, what if you break it or lose it or do something else? But because it was my mother, I said, I'm going to respect her. I'm going to honor her wishes as my mother, and I'm going to make sure that she is treated right. Because our parents have sacrificed a lot to get us to where we're at, and so we want to be willing to sacrifice in order to serve them. Jesus came not to be served, but he came to serve, and the same is true with our family relationships. And this all changes with age, so like the way that a 5-year-old interacts with their parents is different than how I, at 28, interact with my parents, right? I still want to honor them, I still respect them, but at the end of the day, they don't tell me what to do on a day-to-day basis. But when you're living under their roof, you're kind of sacrificing a little bit of your freedom and a little bit of your autonomy. And so if it's not your house, it's also not your rules. And so you got to honor the fact that if you're living in your parents' house, that's a different relationship than when you're independent and on your own. Because as you get older, you think, oh, I'm mature, I'm capable of making these decisions. And sometimes you are, and then sometimes you learn the hard way that you're not. But the truth is, if you're living with your parents, you have to honor their wishes. So like if they say, we want you home by 11 o'clock, or we want you home by midnight, then you got to be home by 11 o'clock or midnight. You don't get to decide what time you go home until you're willing to live on your own and pay your own bills. Okay, you have to honor your parents in that way, and you still honor them even when you're out of the house. And you want to have boundaries. Some of you don't necessarily have two parents that are together, and it can be a little bit complicated. And some of you have parents that mistreated you. Some of you have parents that maybe had funny things going on with money. You know, everyone kind of is coming from a different place. And so sometimes there's a time where you say, you know what, I want to honor my parents, but maybe I realize that what they're doing is kind of toxic and is kind of hurtful to me. And so I might put up some areas of protection where I say, hey, I'm not going to let them talk to me like this, or it just might look different. Do you have anything to add to that, Molly?
Yeah, and I would say especially for you, if you come from a family that has not treated you right, and where there's some behaviors that you think is really unhealthy and maybe even toxic, I think this is a great time or great reason to reach out to maybe someone in the church or someone that brought you here today, like a trusted adult, your youth group leader, your pastor at your church, sharing with them some of these struggles. They might be able to help you practically figure some of these things out, because it really depends on the situation, what to do next. But it's important that whenever you have those conversations, you still want to respect your parents and honor them, because that is what we're called to do as Christians. Even when people don't respect and honor us, we want to show that love. But again, that doesn't mean that we allow bad behavior to continue. But talking to a trusted adult in the church would probably be my recommendation on how to handle that in a way that is honoring and loving.
And when we think about priority of relationships, okay, so obviously your relationship with God is going to be your most important, because God's not going to let you down, but your friends will let you down, your parents will let you down, your boyfriend or girlfriend will absolutely let you down, and then you get married and then you're let down for life, okay? Like that's just kind of like how it goes all the time.
Not Kyle though, not you.
Not me, of course, because my wife is perfect, but everyone else, I have to speak to the audience here, because you think that you found the perfect person, and then eventually you realize, wait a second, I'm not the perfect person, which means that they also are not the perfect person, okay? And so we can't be looking for the perfect person because they don't exist. If you want to find perfection, that's why you read your Bible, because you can only find Jesus Christ, okay?
That's right.
He's the perfect one. And so after God, he's the priority, and then you think of your human relationships, okay? So your family is going to be your first priority, okay? So honor your parents at this stage in your life. They'll be your priority. And after that would be your friends. And in that friendship category would be boyfriend and girlfriend, okay? And eventually, if you get married, which not everyone needs to get married, okay? But if you get married, then you'll form a new family that will be separate from the family that you grew up in. And at that point, your spouse would be your number one human relationship. Your children that you have would be number 2. And then the rest of your family would be 3. And any friends you have would be 4. Okay? But I don't think any of you are married or have children. Okay? So right now, it's your family with the priority being your parents. And after that, it would be your friendships. Okay, so that's how we're going to prioritize things. Because your family is going to stick by you in times where your friends won't. And then Molly is forced to stick by me because she made a vow to God as my wife. Okay, so like there's different priorities here.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we think about family. But Molly, if you have anything to add to that, and then you'll also talk about friendships.
Yeah, so we kind of talked about family and the importance of honoring them, especially parents. Now I'm going to share a little bit about friendships. I'm going to share the ABCs of friendship. So just a couple of things to keep in mind as we're thinking about friends. Friends can be hard, but also can be some of our greatest joys. So the ABCs of friendships. So A is always follow Jesus. And I would say this is not just like something to keep in mind for friendships, but I'd recommend this in all areas of life.
That's good advice.
Good advice. So when we think about our friends, it's important about being intentional about incorporating Jesus into our friendships, bringing Jesus into our friend groups and into our relationships that we have with our peers or our friends. And that means if we're following Jesus, which I hope all of us are, that means that our relationships with our friends, we're going to be in relationships with people who are also following Jesus. Now, this seems super basic on the surface, but I know it's a lot more complicated than that in real life, right? A lot of us are, in schools where there's a lot of people who don't know Jesus or aren't following Jesus yet. And so it can be a little more difficult to have our friendships be with people who are following God. Now, obviously, we don't want to just ignore everyone who's not following Jesus. Like, this is not what I recommend. I don't recommend going to school on Monday and saying, if you don't follow Jesus, I'm not talking to you, because that is not loving, right? Or kind. And Jesus calls us to be salt and light into the world. But what this does mean is that while we are going to have friends that maybe don't know Jesus, the closest people that we have, our best friends, it's best when those people are also following Jesus, because then we're on the same page.
And I've heard it said too, sorry to interrupt, Molly, but I've heard it said too, it's like you are a reflection of the 5 people who you spend the most time with.
And we'll get into that later. But,
okay.
But yeah, so it's good to make sure that the people that we're closest to are following Jesus. And so, I want to share just a little bit about my own experience here. So when I was in high school, I went to a public high school. Anyone else go to public high school? Most of us. We both did too. So I went to a school. It was AWAC in Pennsylvania. Anyone know where that is? Yeah, some people, okay, come on. It sounds like yuck. It's fitting. So I went to a school called AWAC, and a lot of my friends at the time, the people that I ate lunch with, the people that I was in classes with, the people I spent the most time with, they weren't following God. And I remember when I would sit at lunch with them, most of our conversations would end up just being about gossiping about other people. Who people were dating, what people were doing on the weekends. They would always invite me to parties, and they would oftentimes get drunk on the weekends, especially in high school, or just like the vibes were just off constantly, looking back on it. And I would not say that those relationships brought me closer to God. Now, then I went to college. I did go to a Christian school. I went to Grove City College. You don't have to go to a Christian school to find Christian friends, but for me it was a little easier. And the people that I surrounded myself with in college, when we got together and talked, they would talk about like what they were reading in the Bible, you know, or what God was doing in their life. And they would say like, Molly, how can we pray for you? And it was just such a different environment than what I had in high school. And I found that being around those friends brought me a lot closer to God than when the friends that I had in high school. Now, I still kept in touch with people from high school and, you know, loved them. But as I got older, I realized, wow, I really want to prioritize these people who are drawing me closer to God than further away. And so that's number one, always follow Jesus. Great advice. And the B for the ABCs of friendship is be that friend. Be that friend. Kyle was kind of talking about this. Also, God bless you, whoever sneezed. Kyle was kind of talking about this in the beginning. But it's important for us not just to expect that the people we're going to be in relationships with are going to be perfect, but it's important for us to be the kind of people that we want to have in our lives, right? So when we're thinking about friendship, it's not just about finding the perfect friends and then everything's going to be great, but it's about becoming the friend that we would want to have, being a good friend ourselves. And so, like we've been talking about, we want to honor others, love others, put them first. Think about your friends and think about, you know, how can I support them if they're going through a hard time? How can I encourage them? Maybe they have a test coming up and you want to like make them a little sweet treat to give before an exam or a test. I don't know, I would always like that. You know, think about what would I want my friends to do for me? And then do those things. Be that friend. Pray for your friends. Ask how you can pray for them. And check in on them if you know that they're going through something difficult. And so be the friend that you would want to have. So always follow Jesus. Be that friend. And then choose carefully is letter C. Letters and numbers. How tricky. So, and this is what Kyle was talking about. So it has been said that you will become a reflection of the 5 people that you surround yourself with. How many of you have heard that before? Several of you. And it is true. And so when you're thinking about who you want to be, like the kind of person you want to be, maybe you're like, you know what, I want to be someone who's on fire for God. So then I would encourage you think, who are 5 people that you know who are on fire for God? Be their friends. Right? Befriend them. Or think like, you know what, I really want to focus more on my studies because I just do not take school seriously enough. Then like find friends who are also focused on their studies. Or maybe you're like, I want to be, I don't know, a nicer person. I want to be kinder. Then choose friends who are also kind. And so surround yourself with people who you want to become. And so this is just something you can take with you throughout the rest of your life. Friendships, I will say, are only going to get harder. You know, when you're younger, they're kind of easier because you're around people all the time. But as you get older, you'll need to be a lot more intentional. And so when you think about friendship, think, always follow Jesus, be that friend, and choose your friends carefully. So that's a little bit about friends. And now we're going to get into, everyone's been looking forward to this the whole time, right? Now we're going to get into dating. And so when we're talking about dating, we're going to go through 4 common questions, maybe not that you're asking, but maybe that you should be asking when it comes to Christian dating, or just dating in general, really. And so the first question, we're going to do why, when, what, and how. Those are our questions. Questions, dating.
So thinking about that first question as Molly writes it on the board there, what is the purpose of dating? Who here thinks they know what the purpose of dating is? You can raise your hand. Or maybe you're like, Kyle, this is why I'm here. I don't know. Does anyone have an idea? What do you think?
So like get each other closer to Jesus and ultimately get married.
That is a great
Marriage.
answer. Actually, give it a round of applause for Caitlin.
Go, Caitlin.
She will actually be leading the future sessions of this breakout after that answer.
Yes. So the why of dating is ultimately marriage, and ultimately the purpose of marriage, as you said in the beginning, is to lead you closer to God, right? And so, but here's the interesting thing. So we're talking about like Christian dating, right? And so what does the Bible say? Who knows what the Bible says about dating? What's your name? Is that your?
Jacoby.
Yeah, this much. The Bible does not talk about dating. You know why? They didn't have dating back then when the Bible was written. So what happened was two families would, like if Kyle and I were a part of two different families, our parents would talk to each other and say, you wanna set this up? And they would say yes, and then we would just get thrown together and said, okay, you're married now. And we probably wouldn't meet until, we would get married. And so there is no dating in the Bible. So when we're talking about how to date from a Christian perspective, what we're doing is we're pulling what we know from the Bible and we're pulling it together to figure out how we can apply it to 21st century dating. And there are love stories, you could say, from the Bible that we can look to. Things like Ruth and Boaz, we can look to the Song of Solomon. But those situations are much different than what we see in 21st century dating in America today. So that's just good to know, that if you're looking for like a Bible verse to tell you how to date, how many dates to go on before you DTR or like all this stuff, you're not gonna find that. So, but ultimately, we date for marriage. And I think that's super important to keep in mind, because if you're not thinking about marriage right now, dating probably doesn't need to be a huge priority, right?
Yeah. I think sometimes our parents are like, don't get married till you're 25 or 30,
Or
and
later,
the reason why is because they're like, we want you to be mature enough, okay? They think that once you reach a certain age, then you'll be somewhat more ready than you would be now. But what Molly and I really believe is that when are you ready to start dating? When you're mature enough. And a lot of people aren't mature enough until they're 30 or 40, or maybe they're never mature enough, and that's why they break up or they have problems in their relationships, right? But you can be mature at 18, or you could be immature at 18. You could be mature at 40, or you could be immature at 40, okay? It's about, am I willing to put the other person first? Am I willing to be mature enough to realize the world doesn't revolve around me, okay? And you can find that at any age, or some people never find that out, okay? Some people are never ready to date. And a big part of maturity is communication, okay? Girls, guys cannot read your minds.
Here,
okay?
I'll fill in here because it feels like weird, a guy telling girls what to do, right? Yeah. So I will say, like, sometimes we think, our feelings are very important to us. At least they're important to me, and it depends on the girl, right? Some of y'all care more about feelings than others. But sometimes we think true romance is when guys do something for us without us asking, right? If they just know, like maybe it's your birthday, or it's like your 6-month dating anniversary, or it's Valentine's Day, and you're like, the most amazing thing would be like if he got me flowers, or like my favorite chocolate and wrote me this note, and if he surprised me, and that would just be the greatest thing. And the truth is we've kind of been sold that lie from media generally, and thinking that if people do things for us without us asking, that that's like true love. But in reality, healthy relationships need healthy communication. And so it's like, if you are with someone and you want flowers, it is fine to say, hey, like if Kyle and I, Valentine's Day happened, and I say to him, I'm like, I like white roses on Valentine's Day. That's what I tell him. And then he gets me a white rose, and it's beautiful. But it's not less romantic because I say what I want, right? That's just good communication, because Kyle can't read my mind. He wants to love me, and I'm helping him love me when I tell him what I want.
Here's the thing. Guys are simple creatures, okay? We have like one thought at a time. We're just living our best lives, okay? And so like, this is why you just need to lay it out there, ladies. It's like, if you want us to know something, you just got to tell us straight up. I remember in college one time, I had these friends who were girls, and they came to me as a guy because the one liked this guy, and she says, Kyle, I looked at him 3 times during class. Why does he not notice me? And I said, do you know how many people probably look at him? He probably has no idea that you're interested. I said, just talk to him and maybe flirt with him a little bit and maybe let him know that you're interested. And even if you do all those things, he still might not get the idea, okay? So it's like you can't just look at a guy 3 times and expect him to know all your feelings in your heart, okay? Now,
Yes.
guys.
And I think I'll hear you say what you're saying about guys.
Yeah. So I would just say, guys, it also really helps to have clarity, okay? Because I think girls have a lot of emotions and a lot of feelings, and that's not a bad thing. It's just kind of like how God wired us, okay? Guys and girls are just different, and that's a part of what makes us all special. And so, guys, taking that role and taking the initiative, okay, making sure you have clarity, you define the relationship. Situationships are bad. That is not Christ-like, okay?
Right.
You don't just bring a girl by and text her every so often or use her physically, okay? You want to respect each other, okay? And I think guys, sometimes we're so simple that we're not really thinking through things. Girls are thinking about everything that you say, and they're thinking about everything that you text, okay? I don't quite understand it, but it's the way it is. And so you want to be intentional about what you're saying, guys. You want to be intentional about what you're texting. You want to be intentional about how you're treating them and treating them with clarity. Clarity is kindness. Okay? Because if you don't define the relationship or you're not clear about what you're up to, then you're just wasting your time. Okay?
And her time.
And her time. If it's not going to work out, it's not going to work out. Figure it out now. What's the point of oh, it's been 6 months, but I don't know what we're doing. It's why are you wasting your time? That's stupid, in my opinion.
There you go.
So that's what I think as far as communication. Conflict resolution.
And the point that we're talking about these several things is if you're not there, if you can't clearly communicate or communicate with clarity, then you're probably not ready to date, is what we're saying, right?
Yeah, and that's a part of even going back to the family thing. Sometimes we have poor communication because our households that we grew up in were so dysfunctional and our parents didn't really model good communication to us. And so sometimes we carry that with us in our dating relationships. And so maybe you're not ready to date or you're not mature enough to date because you had a really rough time growing up, okay?
Sure.
That's not your fault, but you just have to come to grips with that and figure out how to become mature enough.
Let's just do conflict and then let's continue.
So conflict resolution, you're going to have conflict in your relationships, okay? There's no such thing as a perfect relationship. There's no such thing as couples that don't fight, okay? Maybe not fight like WWE, okay? That's really bad, okay? But you're going to have times that you disagree with the other person. You're going to have times that the other person gets on your nerves, okay? And so it's not a matter of if you have conflict, it's a matter of how you're going to handle it, okay? And so some people have trouble controlling their anger, okay? But we have to make sure that we face things in a healthy way, okay? Just because the other person annoys you in the moment doesn't mean that you have to treat them poorly, okay? You still want to treat the other person like Jesus would treat them in that situation. Okay, you don't treat the other person like they deserve. Okay, there are times that I deserve to be yelled at. There's times where I deserve to be, said mean things to. But that doesn't mean that Molly should do those things to me. Does that make sense? You don't treat the other person like they deserve. You treat the other person like Jesus would treat them, and vice versa. I just tried to make myself the stupid one in that example.
Also,
okay?
Always good, right? That's good. Good stuff. But yes, let's continue on.
So, and then the other thing we talked about, healing from your past, okay? That's a part of maturity, looking at friendships, looking at past romantic relationships, looking at your family. Okay, that's a part of maturity, is realizing what did I deal with before, and now how do I move forward in a way which is honoring to God and honoring to the other person. And also in your spiritual walk. When you have a healthy relationship with God, and you know that you and God are good, then that's going to put a good foundation for your romantic relationships.
Okay, cool.
And when the other person also has that spiritual foundation, then that leaves you in a really great place.
Yeah, and that takes us into, so we talked about why we date, when do we date when you're mature. That might not be in high school. And then what do we look for? Kyle was just talking about this. You want to look for other Christians to date when you are ready to date and when, marriage would make sense in the next, at least maybe 5 years, right? If you're like, I'm not going to get married for 20 years, then don't date. But what to look for? You want to date Christians. You want to date people who are following Jesus. I think we've made this clear with some other things. But if you want to follow Jesus and live a life for him, it does not make sense to be with someone who is not as passionate about Jesus, right? That's just silly. Because you're going to become like the person you're going to be dating, because you're going to spend a lot of time together. So what to look for? Look for someone who displays traits like Jesus.
And the other reason why, too, is because when you find someone, if you're going to be in a relationship with them for your entire life, right? If you're dating to marry, that person is going to change, okay? And so you want to have a foundation in your relationship of things that aren't going to change. And so your faith is something that will stay steady, or should stay steady, for your entire life. Your Christianity is going to hold you for your entire life, but you're probably going to have different hobbies. You're probably going to like different music. You're probably going to do different things and have all those different things different now versus maybe 50 years from now. So build your relationship on something that's going to sustain you for your entire lifetime. Okay? So
that's our last point, and then we'll hopefully have some time for questions, is how do we date? We could talk about this for 5 ever. And so the 2 things we want to highlight is you want to date in community and you want to date with boundaries. And so community means that you don't want to date just on your own, right? This is a big decision as if we're going to think about who do we want to marry. That's, second to choosing to follow Jesus is probably the most important decision you'll make in your life. And so when we're thinking about dating, we want to date in a Christian community. That doesn't mean you're dating everyone in the community, but what it means is you're not dating privately, right? You're having your boyfriend, girlfriend, you're bringing them to church with you, and people in your church family are getting to know them. You're bringing them along with your family's getting to know them. Your closest friends, which are also following Jesus, right, are also getting to know this person, and you're seeing if it's a good match for you, because when you're in love, you have such blindness, which is kind of how God designed it, right? But because we're choosing who we're going to be with while we're falling in love in a way, while we're choosing to love people, it's important that we're making that decision in a community with other believers. And so be in community.
They say love is blind, deaf, and stupid, okay? That is true, okay? But the thing is, your parents and your friends are not blind, deaf, or stupid, probably.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not, maybe. And so they can actually give you a lot of clarity on whether this person is awful or whether they're actually worth your time.
Yes, and just quickly with boundaries.
Yeah.
3 types of boundaries we just want to touch on super fast. The first is emotional. And you're like, what? Emotional boundaries? So, like I said, we all have a lot of feelings. We all have a lot of past. We've lived a lot of life. It does not make sense to bare our soul with someone completely when you first meet them. That is just a little weird. And so as you're dating someone, it's important that you share as much with them about who you are as makes sense for how serious you are. That's going to increase with time, right? Don't they call it like love dumping? What's the phrase?
I don't know. That seems like a weird phrase.
Isn't there something?
Trauma dumping?
Yeah,
Trauma
but
dumping,
something that or
sounds
love bombing. Like when someone's texting you for 2 days and they tell you they love you, that is not having good emotional boundaries, right? That's what it's called, right? Love bombing.
Yeah.
See, I'm still young and hip. Okay, second kind of boundary is spiritual boundaries. You might be thinking, what? Spiritual boundaries? In the similar way with emotional boundaries, it doesn't make sense to be super duper close spiritually with someone who you've just recently met. So if you just started dating someone, I would not recommend having one-on-one prayer time on Tuesdays from 5 to 7. Okay, that's just a bit much. Or having one-on-one Bible studies with someone who you're just dating. Studying the Bible is great. Do it in youth group. Do it in community. You don't need to be doing those things just one-on-one, right? That can create a false sense of intimacy. Number 3, what you're all probably thinking, is having some physical boundaries. And so the big physical boundaries is that the fullness of love in marriage is expressed in marriage with sex between one guy and one girl. And Kyle, did you want to share more about
I want
how
to share that a little bit, just on that, like, not like dwelling on this, okay? But I think sometimes we hear that from like churches, and we hear that from parents, and we're like, okay, maybe that worked in like the dinosaur ages, but like you don't understand what it's like. You don't understand how I feel, okay? And the truth is, actually, God already knew how you felt whenever he had this expectation of like what expression was supposed to be. So like sex is a special thing, but it's meant to be expressed within a marriage between a man and a woman, okay? And the reason why is because God made us man and woman for each other. Like that was God's design, and he designed it perfectly. And I think sometimes, especially guys, okay, guys are a little bit more like physical creatures, and women are sometimes a little bit more emotional creatures. And so I think a big part of the reason why God designed the physical boundaries was to protect the well-being of women, so that they felt secure, healthy, and safe in their relationships, okay? And so as guys, it's not just about like, oh, the pastor told me to keep the pants on. Okay, like the pastor is telling you to keep the pants on, okay? But in addition, if you actually care about the person you're dating, then you want to make sure that you're respecting their emotions enough that you're making sure they feel safe and secure, and that means doing it God's way, okay? And I've never ever heard someone say, wow, I wish I'd gone further physically when I was dating. But I've heard so many people say, wow, I went too far physically when I was dating, and I have all these regrets, because sometimes the person who you think loves you actually doesn't. Sometimes the person you thought would be your forever person at the age of 14 actually isn't your forever person, okay? Sometimes they are, and that's wonderful, okay? But you want to make sure you have those physical boundaries, because you're not going to regret keeping those boundaries whenever you get to the point where you're old, like Molly and I.
Super
okay?
Old. And we're, just to add, the thing that's passing around, that's if you have questions that you don't want to ask just verbally, but you can also ask questions there. We'll get to that in just a minute.
And just to finally, last little bit here, is that mistakes do happen, okay? And maybe some of you feel like I've already made mistakes, or maybe I've gone too far. And I think that if that is your case, it's like, hey, God can redeem anything. And you can always say, hey, I'm going to choose to follow Jesus from this time forward, and I'm going to honor God in my relationships, no matter what happened in my past, okay?
Yeah.
And
great.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to just have a couple minutes of questions before a group goes to lunch. And so where is the bowl, the fun bowl?
It's somewhere back. Does anyone have any questions that they're comfortable asking?
And then I'll just be traveling around with the bowl. You can put your questions in there.
You were talking about dating Christians. What do you do if the person you're dating, or like you get your atheist and you date, and then one of you becomes Christian?
Sure.
That's a great question. So if you're dating, I would say you break up with them. Okay? But if you're married, okay, let's say later in life, okay, you meet someone, whatever, okay, and you weren't Christians before you got married, stay married to them, and the Bible says you may win them over. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, I believe it is, actually talks about this, but it's talking about it within the context of marriage. It is not talking about it in the context of dating.
Correct. I would echo that, and that sounded kind of harsh, but like, you know, we just tell it like it is over here.
Yeah.
But like the dating, you are not committed to them the way that you are when you're married. So if like things are going really bad, you can break up, and that's great.
Boyfriends and girlfriends are just a friend that you kiss, okay? Like it's
or not, or not, or hug, or hold hands.
With boundaries,
whatever.
Of course.
Boundaries.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other
all right.
questions?
So let's. Any other questions?
We have one up front.
You were talking about community and the how.
Yeah.
Do you attempt to institute that in like a long distance relationship?
Yeah, that's actually a great question.
Great,
I would say that long distance relationships are really hard. Okay, and so hopefully at some point you started the relationship when it wasn't long distance. And so I'd say having healthy community from the start is really healthy. That then can sustain you when you become long distance. But hopefully if it's long distance, then you make the effort like, hey, come visit. And when you're here and we're together in person, you're going to then be spending time with the extended family, and you're going to be spending time with friendships. And it won't just be the two of you interacting, but you can find that time. Even long distance relationships have time where you're together. And so use that time together in order to have other people be around them, and so that they can be give you that accountability. Does that make sense? Yeah. Do you have any in the bowl?
Yes, there was one about long distance, so that's good.
Right.
This other one is kind of talking about like kind of the spiritual intimacy thing, about having like prayer or one-on-one Bible studies with someone you are intending on marrying and have been dating for 6+ months. Is it still okay? I would just say it depends on how old you are. If you're 15, I would just say that it's like, why are you doing that? It would be my curiosity. Like, I would encourage you to be in, like, maybe invite other people into that group. Like, it doesn't just need to be you and that other person. If you're like 21, which I don't think anyone here is that old, then like maybe that could be okay. I think the good question, Bryden's 21, he got really offended. But I think the good thing is just to think about, why are you doing that? And could you grow closer to God with that other person if other people are there? Because the reason that we talk about spiritual intimacy is so that you're not depending on each other for growing closer to God, right? So you want to not depend on one another, you want to depend on the community. Would you say anything else to that, or is that?
I think you got it. Is there any questions someone didn't put in the bowl, or do we want to keep going to the bowl? Yeah.
What if you like weird unbelief amongst them, but they're not Christian? Like, can you not date them?
Here's the thing. You can do whatever you want because we have free will, right? But it's like, is it actually a good idea, right? And so like, is it a good idea to date someone even though you love them and they're not Christian? It's probably not a great idea, because that person's going to draw you further away from God, and your relationship with God is your most important. And also, if they're not a committed Christian, they're probably not going to respect your physical boundaries. And then that's also opens up a whole nother can of worms about not doing life the way that God intended. So that's what I would say, is like, you can do whatever you want, but it's not wise. Okay?
And I'll just say, we'll just have one more question. And if we didn't get to your question, Kyle and I will be up here for a few minutes. You can be free to, we'll chat with you individually. And again, we're being blunt. If we were talking to you over a long period of time, we would, flesh these out more. But this is just such a good question, we have to ask it. How far is too far? Kyle, what is your first response when you hear that question?
How far is too far? Not as far as you think, okay?
I think it's the wrong question.
Yeah.
If you're thinking, where is the line and how close, and then typically this is asked in terms of physical stuff. If you're thinking, where's the line and how close can I get to that line? Your whole attitude is twisted, right? We want to be thinking, how much can I honor that person? How much can I honor God in this relationship? And when you answer those questions, you're probably going to find that the how far is too far is not nearly as far as you think. But we're not going to give a specific boundary, because that's like not the heart of
I don't know.
Physical boundaries.
Here's the thing, okay? You love each other, you like each other, okay? It is what it is, okay? Obviously, we said sex is something that's reserved for marriage, okay? I think a good thing to do is to say, hey, we're not even going to go anywhere close to that. If you're like, I wonder, does this count? Or could I get away with this? Then that is too far, okay? If you're like, I wonder, too far, okay? Even like if you're really young, I'd even say like making out might be too far. Like some forms of kissing might be too far, because when you're young, you never know, okay? So I'd say give them a kiss, okay? If they're your boyfriend and girlfriend, you like them, that's great, okay? But you don't need to go very far, okay? There'll be plenty of time for that. Okay, you have your rest of your lives to look forward to whatever. And before you worry about how far is too far, worry about, am I mature enough? Okay, guys, instead of worrying, is this too far? Worry about getting a job so that you can actually pay for dates. Okay.
And with that, hey y'all, we know you're hungry for lunch. This was great. There's so much more that can be said. And if you want more specific advice, go to your youth leader, go to your pastor, go to a trusted adult. We'll be up here for a few minutes to answer some questions too. But God bless you, and go on to have healthy, thriving relationships.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.